On this channel, we deal with forgotten, lost history. But what is history in the first place? When did it begin? What is BC and AD, and what is BCE and CE? What about ancient times, classical times, and modern times? And what is medieval? Who was evil, and when? Today we do something different and attempt to grasp history from a Western, or should I say European, point of view. The term history evolved from a Greek word, historia. As a verb, it translates as to know. As a noun, it can be translated as inquiry. But for the ancient Greeks, it had a much broader meaning. Historia is the act of seeking knowledge, and also the knowledge that is the result of this search. Today, history is considered a study of past events. But as we can see, it is actually much more than that. There are many different ways in which historians divide historical timelines. For example, one system says that prehistory lasted from 2,500 million to 500 years BC. Then came the Classical Age, which encompasses the ancient Greek and Roman periods. They were followed by the Middle Ages and the Modern Age. You see, the difference between prehistory and history is the ability to write. In the previous timeline, that was placed at around 500 BC, when the ancient Greek period started. However, that is not accurate. The Proto-Greek civilizations in Mycenae had their own writing known as Linear B. Before them, the Minoans had Linear A. And even before that, the Mesopotamian cultures had their cuneiform style of writing. Those were the Sumerians, who lived in the 4th millennium BC, which was, for the longest time, considered the time prehistory ended. But the oldest evidence of human writing goes even further into the past than that. Let me explain the timeline that I like the most, which happens to be the simplest one. There are three most basic historical periods, or eras: ancient, medieval, and modern era. So, history begins when humans first started writing. Everything before that is considered prehistory. The oldest evidence of human writing is tortoiseshell carvings, as well as cliff carvings with thousands of different characters, found in China. They have been dated to around 6,000 years BC. So that's when the ancient era begins, at least for now. I will be surprised if we don't discover even older evidence of human writing. Maybe it's hidden in a long-forgotten cave somewhere, or waiting for us deep beneath the sea. But let's get back to our timeline and the ancient era. For Europe, this is the time the ancient Greek culture flourished and the Roman culture after that. That is also known as the classical period of the ancient era. Art, science, philosophy, critical thought. It was an age of prosperity, for the most part, until it all came tumbling down. Like in modern times, back then people struggled for power. It led to inner conflict within the Roman Empire, which made it an easier target for invading nomadic tribes. At that time, a huge migration of Germanic and Slavic people was in full swing, and they came knocking at the borders of the Roman Empire. Eventually, in 476 AD, they managed to crush the Romans, and that year is considered as the start of the medieval era. Slowly, but surely, ancient prosperity became a thing of the past. Christianity took the reins. Old pagan books were considered heresy, and therefore destroyed, and with them, thousands of years of knowledge. That is why this era is also known as the Dark Ages. Europe was plunged into 1,000 years of darkness, as any critical thought would get you shunned from society as a best-case scenario. But we all know it often resulted in being burnt at the stake for heresy. So things once grand and beautiful were left to ruin, and the glory of past times was all but forgotten. Christianity became the norm, as well as the class system. And the reason it is called the medieval period? Well, that's simple. You see, this classification of eras came from the modern times. So, when we looked back, there were the really old times, the new times, and the period in the middle. In Latin, it was called Medii Aevi, which literally means the Middle Ages. I like to call it the other name, the 1,000 years of darkness. We had the feudal system that exploited the poor so the rich could get richer. And countries would rise, prosper, and fall. However, all of that ended at around 1500 AD, and thus the modern era began. Why 1500? Well, a bunch of stuff happened around that time. The fall of Constantinople in 1453, Gutenberg's movable type printing press in the 1450s, the completion of the Reconquista in 1492, and Christopher Columbus's voyage to the Americas. The feudal system was on the decline, and the world was about to change yet again. The fall of Constantinople meant the end of the Byzantine Empire, which had spawned from the Eastern Roman Empire. When it fell, the Muslim Turks had a foothold in Europe, and they were about to wreak havoc for hundreds of years to come. Gutenberg's printing press hailed a new era, as the one thing that started history in the first place, writing, could now be done in a much faster way. Up until then, the people doing most of the writing were poor monks in Christian monasteries who had to do it by hand. In AD 711, Muslims from North Africa, later known as the Moors, invaded the Iberian Peninsula and defeated the Visigoths who ruled the land. Centuries of fighting ensued, which were later dubbed the Reconquista, or reconquering. It laid the foundation for what became present-day Spain and ended with the conquest of Granada in 1492. And then, the discovery of America happened the same year, and that was a true game-changer. So if we had to pinpoint the start of the modern era to a specific year, it would be 1492. The modern era saw the revival of ancient wisdom and art, which is known as the Renaissance, meaning rebirth or revival. It is also referred to as humanism and Renaissance, because man started to be the focal point of human thought. We started to marvel at the ancient sculptures and art that celebrated man with all his attributes and flaws. This point of view permeated through everything, including art, architecture, science, philosophy. This change gave way for humanity to evolve and prosper once again. That is the early modern period, which ended with the Great Revolutions in the USA and France. They marked the end of a world dominated by imperialism and colonial powers, and the beginning of a world of nations. As I've said in the beginning, this is the European perspective. It means little to people living in other parts of the world. However, it is extremely difficult to create a classification that will satisfy everybody. Even so, steps are being made towards that goal. The best example of that is Year Zero. In Western culture, Year Zero marks the supposed time Jesus Christ was born, and it has remained a staple for measuring time. That is why we say BC, denoting the time before Christ, or before Year Zero. The time that happened after that was AD, or Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. Since roughly 70% of the world is not Christian, it was decided that the terms BC and AD should be changed. So now, most historians use the terms BCE and CE, which stand for Before Common Era and Common Era, respectively. But me? I'm not a real historian, but more of a romantic, and BCE and CE sound so dry and lifeless. That is why I decided to stick with the old terms. I hope this helped you grasp the basic era of human history. If you want me to go in depth on this topic, let me know in the comments below.